Friends, this is the story of David King, the founder of a music record company called Stackin' Hits. He had once sold off the majority of his company's shares, but now he wanted to buy them back. At home, he stopped his wife Pam from making a big purchase. He asked her if she could wait a little. Pam immediately sensed that something was going on in David's mind. David had a son named Trey King, who played basketball. One day, Trey asked his father if he had listened to the singer Sula, the one he had told him about. David replied, "Do you want me to listen to her because she can sing, or because you like her?" Trey smiled and said, "Both?" David nodded. "Alright, I'll listen." The two then went to the basketball court. Trey's friend Kyle was there too. David was Kyle's godfather. But before the game, David excused himself, telling Trey he had work at the office. He promised, "I'll come watch your game tomorrow." With that he left. Waiting outside was his driver and trusted confidant, Paul, who also happened to be Kyle's father. Paul had brought some files for David. While looking through them, David asked Paul for advice. "Tell me, what should I do?" Paul simply said, "Sometimes, to gain something in this world, a man has to go a little crazy." David then arrived at his company. A young singer was there, eager to let him hear her song. In the music world, it was said that David King had the best ears in the business. After that, David went to meet his partner Patrick. Stackin' Hits was about to be acquired by a company called Stray Dog Enterprises. But David believed they wouldn't honor the legacy he had built. He never supported AI-generated music, saying it lacked soul. Still, David knew the deal was extremely profitable. It could make them a lot of money. So, he made Patrick an offer, "Sell your shares to me. You'll get your payout, and I'll gain majority power, enough to stop this deal." David assured him that only he could take the company forward in the right way. Patrick eventually agreed. From that moment, David began liquidating all his assets. He went home and told Pam everything, but she wasn't happy about it. She questioned why David had suddenly changed his entire plan. She asked where the money was coming from. David explained that he planned to take a loan against their penthouse and sell off their stocks and bonds. Pam was not on board. She said the risk was far too high. But David argued, "Every step I've taken to get here, I took with risk." And just then a phone call came. Someone had kidnapped their son, Trey. David immediately called out for Paul. They alerted the authorities. Within minutes, the police arrived and set up their equipment all over the house. They asked David what the kidnappers had demanded. The kidnappers wanted the $17.5 million ransom paid in 1,000 Swiss franc notes. David and Pam were ready to give whatever it took to get their son back. The police quickly sent Trey's photo to the real-time crime center, so that patrolling officers could also have his picture in hand. Detective Bridges, who was in charge, told David, "In most cases, kidnappings like this are carried out by someone close." But David insisted, "No, there's no one like that here." The detective looked him in the eye and said, "Mr. King, I know a man of your stature isn't used to taking orders from anyone. But please, from here on out, do exactly as I say." Meanwhile, Paul kept asking about his son Kyle, desperate to know where he was. But the officers weren't paying attention to him. Just then, outside the basketball arena, they found Trey's headband. The detective immediately mobilized every department into action. 2 officers went to question Trey's basketball coach, Rick Fox. The coach explained that he had seen Trey limping while running, so he told him to put ice on his ankle. He believed the boys might have snuck out just before lunch. Soon after, the news of Trey's kidnapping broke into the media. The detectives also started questioning Paul, stopping him from going out to look for Kyle. They suspected that maybe Paul and his son could be involved in this somehow. Paul went straight to David. He said he had already called uptown to ask around if the streets had heard anything. David told him, "All right, but don't do anything stupid." Paul replied, "I'll do whatever you say. You've done so much for me. Trey is like a son to me too." And then a piece of good news arrived. The police had found Trey. Everyone was relieved. The officers brought Trey home safely. But Paul immediately began demanding answers about his own son. "Where's Kyle?" he shouted. The detectives explained that Kyle had been wearing Trey's headband, which confused the kidnapper. By mistake, they had kidnapped Kyle instead of Trey. Paul exploded in anger. and even the police were growing frustrated with his behavior. Trey then explained what had happened. At lunchtime, he wanted pizza, while Kyle wanted chopped cheese. They had planned to meet after grabbing their food. But Trey kept waiting, and Kyle never showed up. Both their phones were locked in their lockers, so Trey had no way of knowing what had happened. He was left completely confused. David stepped in, saying, "That's enough questioning. Trey needs to rest now." But Paul could no longer control his emotions. Trey asked David directly, "You'll pay the ransom for Kyle, right?" Just then, the kidnapper called again. David told him, "You know you kidnapped the wrong boy, right?" The kidnapper answered, "Yes, I know." David snapped back, "Then you can't expect me to give you $17.5 million for someone else's son." The kidnapper replied coldly, "Then someone else's blood will be on your hands." David tried to negotiate. "Listen, I can help you. Let the boy go, and I'll make sure you walk free." But the kidnapper refused to listen. He demanded all the money stuffed into a Jordan bag, promising to send drop-off details the next morning. He had called from a burner phone, so tracing him was impossible. The detectives began analyzing the situation. Why was the kidnapper insisting on ransom in Swiss francs? One officer explained, "Because they're lighter. 17.5 million in 1,000 franc notes would weigh only 35 pounds. But in US $100 bills, that same amount would weigh 385 pounds. There's no way David could manage a drop-off carrying that much weight." Meanwhile, Paul came to David, saying that, "If you don't pay the ransom, the kidnapper would kill his son. Just treat the amount as a loan to me." But the figure was enormous. David told him, "You've never even seen that kind of money in your life." Paul fired back, "But you were ready to pay it for Trey. Why not for my son?" Paul already knew about the stake and hits deal. He knew David had access to the money. David grew tense. "If you're counting my money now, then count it all. Do you even know how much people owe me? Do you know how many people I pay?" For David, the choice was brutal. If he gave up that money to save Paul's son, he would lose stake and hits. But if he didn't, Paul would lose his only son. And for Paul, Kyle meant everything. Just then, David's partner Patrick came to meet him. David explained everything and admitted, "I don't think I can pay the ransom." Patrick warned him, "But what will people say? They'll say you let that boy die just so you could buy back stake and hits. Social media will destroy you. They'll finish you." David replied, "I know. But you also know how fast the news cycle moves. By tomorrow, another story will take over. People will forget all about this." Right now, David believed that was the only logical path forward. He even shared this with his wife, saying, "Patrick believes if I don't pay, the backlash could end my career completely." Meanwhile, Trey was glued to social media. David came to see him and apologized for missing his game. He told his son, "Everything I do for you, for our family." But Trey shot back, "Then how is refusing to pay Kyle's ransom good for us? How is it good for Paul and Kyle?" David said quietly, "It isn't that simple." But Trey understood the reality. If they didn't pay, the media would destroy them. They would be painted as villains. Trey was already receiving hateful messages. Some even said Kyle should be alive and he should be dead instead. He worried, "What will my classmates think? That my best friend died because of me? How am I supposed to go back and finish high school after this?" David said, "I don't know." Trey burst out shouting, "Yes, you do. You know exactly what to do. Just pay the 17.5 million. Hearing his son yell, David's temper flared. He snapped, "You don't talk to me like that in my own house. There's only one man in this house, and it's me." As David stormed off, Trey said, "David King, the man with the best ears in the business, but the coldest heart." Later, David went to talk with Paul. But when he was finally alone in his room, David broke down and began to cry. Just then, the detective entered. He asked, "I just need to know one thing. Tomorrow, when the kidnapper calls, will you tell him you're going to pay the ransom? That will give us more time to work." David gave no answer. Instead, he gathered his family and went straight to Paul. Trey spoke up and said firmly, "We'll pay the ransom." Paul hugged David tightly. The detectives were informed of the decision. The detective assured them, "We'll get both Kyle and the ransom money back." Paul prayed with all his heart. At that moment, prayer was the only thing he had left. Meanwhile, Kyle was shown tied up in a bathtub with a song playing in the background. The next morning, David went to the bank and withdrew the ransom in Swiss francs. Soon after, the kidnapper called. He instructed David to pack all the money into a bag and board a train. More details would follow later. But then the kidnapper made another demand. He wanted Pam's Cartier bracelet as well. David protested, "Look, I'm already giving you the money. That bracelet was a gift for our 15th wedding anniversary. I can't give that up." The kidnapper didn't care. Pam quietly took off her bracelet and placed it in front of David. Meanwhile, the police planted a tracking device inside the bag of cash so they could capture the kidnapper after the drop. Officers were stationed at every stop along the route, and 2 plainclothes policemen would stay with David at all times. Everyone left in separate cars. David and the 2 officers boarded the train at the designated station. He wore a cap pulled low to cover his face. But today was no ordinary day. There was a big basketball game happening, and the train filled with excited fans heading to the match. The cars erupted with cheers as they sang and shouted for their team. At the same time, the National Puerto Rican Day Parade was taking place in the city. Crowds of Puerto Ricans were celebrating together, and celebrities like Anthony Ramos and Rosie Perez were there as well. Right in the middle of this chaos, David's phone rang again. The kidnapper ordered him to move between subway cars. "When I say so, drop the backpack." David pushed back, "Not until I see Kyle." Suddenly, someone pulled the emergency chain, jolting the train. In the commotion, David's bag fell. Waiting hands grabbed it from below, and the kidnappers ran off into the crowd. They released Kyle in the middle of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. The police tried tracking the bag with the GPS device, but the thick crowds made it almost impossible. One man handed the bag to another, then another, over and over again to throw off the chase. Then the signal from the tracker went dead. Finally, when the police caught a man holding the bag, they opened it, only to find it stuffed with tampons instead of cash. The kidnappers had outsmarted them. Meanwhile, Kyle sat weak and broken on a swing, traumatized by everything. On social media, however, David had suddenly turned into a hero. His name was everywhere. At the hospital, detectives began questioning Kyle. They asked him to describe anything about where he had been held, sounds, smells, anything. Kyle said, "There was this song playing, one I'd never heard before. It kept saying, back it up to the front." But to the police, that detail didn't seem useful. They pressed him to keep trying. Kyle begged for a break, but the officers refused, pushing him harder. Paul stepped in furiously. "When Trey needed rest, you gave it to him. Why not my son?" The argument between Paul and the detectives quickly escalated, and soon everyone walked out of the room. On the other side of town, a man named Gabe came to meet David at his company. He told him, "All your partners admire what you did. But our agreement was very clear. That money was meant to buy back shares of Steak and Hits. Not for this." He announced that the deal was now off. David tried to salvage it. "I'll pay back the money with interest." But Gabe shook his head. "This is a breach of contract. It will be considered fraud, which means you could go to jail." The truth was, David's investors had given him money for one specific purpose: to buy back shares of Steak and Hits Records. Since he had diverted those funds, they now demanded their money back within 2 weeks. If he failed, David would lose everything: his penthouse, his home, even his artwork. After this, Patrick and another partner named Alex came to meet David. David told them, "Let's just sell Steak and Hits. Let's make the deal with Stray Dogs Enterprises." But Alex had already called the deal off. Because of everything that had just happened with David, their company was back on the front page. Their sales were surging again. But David desperately wanted to sell Steak and Hits. He needed money to pay everyone back. The problem was, the same partners who once wanted to sell were now refusing, because the company's renewed popularity had made it too valuable. David was completely trapped. As he walked down the street, he put on his headphones and started listening to music. That's when he heard the exact same song Kyle had mentioned, the one that went, back it up to the front. David rushed to Kyle and asked, "Was this the song you heard?" Kyle nodded, "Yes." The singer's name was Young Felon. David realized that the kidnapper's voice and young felon's voice were exactly the same. The police didn't believe him. But Paul stepped forward. "I've seen him. He came to meet David before." Paul reached out to his sources and gathered more information on the rapper. The police insisted they had to do a proper investigation first and refused to take David's word. Paul dismissed them. Forget the police. Through his own contacts, he found out more about young felon. David and Paul headed to the rapper's house. Paul carried a gun with him. At the house, they found young felon's wife and young child. The woman immediately recognized David. "My husband Archie is your biggest fan. He even named our son after you." Archie, better known as Young Felon, had been living in his studio for the past 2 weeks. He believed that one day King David himself would come and discover him. David asked the woman for the address of the studio, telling her, "I'll go surprise your husband." That's when he noticed something shocking. The woman was wearing Pam's Cartier bracelet. She claimed she didn't think it was real. David left immediately and headed for Young Felon's studio. He asked Paul to hand him a gun. Paul gave him one, keeping another for himself. David said, "I'll go in alone." When he reached the studio, a dog was tied up outside. David carefully avoided it and went inside. Inside, Young Felon was recording a track with another man. David pulled out his gun and forced the man to leave. Now face to face with Young Felon, David sat down across from him and said, "You've got a lot of potential. But who taught you to do these wrong things?" Their heated exchange turned into a rap battle. David demanded, "Tell me where my money is. I've got a gun sitting right here." But then David softened slightly. "I'll give you another chance. I met your wife. Your son is named after me." Young Felon replied, "You don't know how long I've dreamed of this moment. That you and I would one day be in a music lab face to face. No matter how hard I tried, I could never get close to you." Everything Young Felon had done was just to get David's attention. But suddenly, Young Felon fired a shot at David and bolted. David grabbed his gun and chased after him. Young Felon opened fire on Paul's car. The glass shattered, and shards pierced into Paul's eye. Through the pain, Paul told David, "Go after him. Don't stop." David continued chasing Young Felon until they reached a subway station. Young Felon tried to escape by jumping into a moving train, but David jumped in right after him. Inside the subway, David couldn't see Young Felon anywhere. That's because Young Felon had climbed up above the subway car, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, suddenly, he dropped down from above and attacked. The two got into a brutal fight. Blow after blow, David overpowered him and beat him badly. Meanwhile, at Young Felon's home, the police discovered the ransom money hidden under his bed. Later, David and his entire family visited Paul in the hospital, where he was receiving treatment for his injured eye. David offered Paul his old job back, but Paul respectfully declined. At this time, Steak and Hit songs were once again topping the charts. Soon, Young Felon was brought to court. Outside, his supporters were demanding his release. Inside, Young Felon confessed to all his crimes. With that confession, there would be no trial. But before sentencing, he requested one last meeting with David. When they met, Young Felon said, "Look, every record company out there wants to sign me now. I'm at the top, but I want you to sign me, so you can benefit too." David firmly refused. He told him he was walking away from Steak and Hits. Instead, he would start his own label, one he could control completely. Young Felon couldn't understand. Why would you walk away from all that money? After this kidnapping, you're more famous than ever. I revived your career. But David had already made up his mind. Days later, he finally listened to the singer Trey had told him about, Sula. Her voice was beautiful, and David loved her performance. He asked her the name of the song. She told him, "Highest to Lowest." David decided then and there that he would launch her career. And with that, friends, this story comes to an end. Tell us in the comments how you liked this explanation. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.